My name is Elaine Myers. I'm 34, and the day my mother drained my savings account, I sat in my car and laughed until I couldn't breathe. Not from joy. My mom had just demanded $15,000 for my sister's wedding. I'd finally said no. And 2 days later, every dollar I'd saved for 6 years was simply gone. She'd used the card I trusted her with when I was lying in a hospital bed. I laughed because I finally saw it, clear as glass. The machine my whole family had been running on me my entire life. What I did next cost me everything I thought I couldn't live without. But the very next morning, my sister called me, panicking, and that is when it truly began. If a story here ever makes you feel a little less alone, that's why we exist. So before we go further, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe, because what happened over the next 6 weeks taught me something I wish someone had told me at 20. Love that keeps a ledger was never love at all, and the person everyone called selfish turned out to be the only one telling the truth. I deliver babies for a living. Labor and delivery, night shift, 12 years now. It is the kind of job where everything can go wrong in 90 seconds, and everyone in the room turns to look at you. I am good at being the calm one. I have had a lot of practice, because I have been the calm one in my family since I was 9. When my parents fought about money, I did the dishes. When my little sister needed a science project at midnight, I built the volcano. When the water heater died, I paid for it. Somewhere along the way, calm became my whole identity, and identity became a bill nobody else ever helped cover. That spring, for the first time, I was letting myself want something just for me. On my refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a pineapple, was a mortgage pre-approval letter and a closing date. A little 2-bedroom house on Larch Street, blue shutters, a crooked porch, a kitchen just big enough for a real table. I had saved $15,000 for the down payment, 6 years of packed lunches, no vacations, and picking up every extra shift the hospital would give me. I used to drive past that house on my way home and slow down, like it might notice me. I wanted a table of my own, a place where the only ledger was a grocery list. What I did not know that night, cruising past those blue shutters at 15 miles an hour, was how long that table would sit empty before anyone I loved would sit at it, and how much I would pay to finally deserve it. Sunday dinner at my mother's house ran like a small government, and I was the department nobody thanked. My mom, Carol, poured coffee for Sabrina first, always, even when I was closer to the pot. She asked Sabrina about her skin, her job, her feelings. She asked me to check the oven. Sabrina is 27, 7 years younger, and she was born being poured for. I was born pouring. Nobody sat us down and explained the arrangement. You just learn where your place is set. My father, Ron, sat at the head of the table and agreed with whoever spoke last. He is a quiet man, and I used to think quiet meant kind. The only person who ever seemed to see the arrangement was my grandfather, Walter, my mom's father, a country doctor who kept working until his hands shook. He would watch me clearing plates and shake his head. Once, on his back porch, he took my hand and said something I have carried like a stone in my pocket ever since. Love that keeps a ledger isn't love, Ellie. It's rent. He died 2 years ago, at 88, and I felt like the last person who knew my real name had left the room. That particular Sunday, my mother set down the gravy and mentioned, lightly, the way you mention weather, that Sabrina's wedding was going to be spectacular. A vineyard, a string quartet, 200 guests under white lights. She said it while looking at me, not at Sabrina, and something in my stomach went cold and quiet, the way a room goes quiet before a code is called. I told myself I was imagining it. I have a talent for telling myself that. It has cost me more than any hospital bill ever did. She caught me at the sink, of course. That was where the real business of the family always happened, over running water, where nobody else could hear. My mother dried a plate she did not need to dry and told me the number like she was reading it off a receipt. $15,000. That's what the wedding needs, and that's what you'll cover. She did not ask. Asking was for people who could be told no. She said it the way she once told me I would babysit on prom night, the way she told me I would skip the school trip so Sabrina could have braces. Not cruelly, efficiently. My mother was never cruel. Cruelty announces itself. What she was certain, and certainty is heavier than any raised voice. I stood there with a plate going pruny in my hands and did the math I already knew. $15,000 was not a number that lived in the air for me. It was the exact number taped to my refrigerator under a pineapple magnet. It was Larch Street. It was the crooked porch and the kitchen table and the 6 years. She knew that. She had to know that because I had told her about the house at this very sink 3 weeks earlier, and she had said how nice and changed the subject to Sabrina's dress. Now she wanted the down payment on my whole life to become a deposit on a string quartet. "You've always been able to handle things," she said, patting my arm like I was a good dog. "Sabrina can't. You can." And there it was. The whole religion of my family in a single breath. Delivered over dish soap. You can. Sabrina can't. As if that had ever been a fact, and not a job I had been assigned before I could speak. I said no. It came out quieter than I expected, and steadier, which surprised us both. 34 years of yes, and the no just walked out of me like it had been waiting by the door with its coat on. My mother set the towel down very slowly. First came the hurt face, the one that had ended 100 arguments before they started. When that didn't move me, the temperature dropped. She reminded me she had carried me for 9 months. She reminded me of every sacrifice, itemized, a lifetime of them, as if love were a loan with interest and the payment was finally due. "Real family," she said, "doesn't count pennies against each other," which was rich, coming from a woman who had just handed me an invoice by the sink. Sabrina appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes already wet. "This is my wedding," she said, like the wedding was a person I was strangling. My father studied his coffee like it contained instructions. Nobody yelled. That is the thing about families like mine. The knives are all made of guilt, and guilt does not leave a mark you can photograph. I held my ground, and it felt less like standing firm and more like standing in a doorway during an earthquake, waiting to see what fell. My mother finally looked at me, and the strangest thing happened. She smiled. Not a warm smile, a small private one, the smile of someone who has just remembered where she left the spare key. "We'll figure it out," she said and touched my cheek, and went back to serving dessert. I should have known right then. When my mother stops arguing, it is never because she has given up. It is because she has already decided she does not need my permission for what she is about to do. Here is the part I have replayed 1,000 times, looking for the moment I was stupid, and never quite finding it. 3 months before that dinner, my appendix tried to kill me. It ruptured on a Tuesday. I drove myself to my own hospital half fainting, and I woke up 2 days later with a scar and a morphine drip and a stack of bills I could not reach. I live alone, in an apartment on the east side of town, 15 minutes from my mother. There was no one else to ask. So I asked her. Grab my mail, pay the electric so it doesn't lapse, keep the lights on until I can stand up. I gave her my debit card and my online banking password, the way you hand your keys to the one person who is supposed to be safest in the world. When I got home and could think again, I did the responsible thing. I changed the password. I told myself I was being careful, not paranoid, because paranoid is what they call you right before they prove you should have been. What I did not do, what I did not think to do, was cancel the physical card and the account number she had already written down in her careful looping hand. Why would I? She was my mother. In 12 years of nursing, I have learned that the danger is almost never the stranger in the parking lot. It is the person who already has a key and a reason, and your trust doing the deadbolt's job for free. I locked the front door every night that spring. I set the alarm. I did everything a careful woman does. And the whole time, the number that could empty my life was sitting in a drawer in my mother's kitchen, waiting for her to decide she deserved it more than I did. The phone campaign started Monday. My Aunt Karen called first, my mother's younger sister and lifelong lieutenant, with the tone of a woman disappointed in a child. "It's just a wedding, Elaine. How can you be so cold?" Then a cousin. Then my mother's oldest friend, who I had not spoken to since I was in braces, calling to tell me that family is everything and money is nothing, from a woman who has never once let me forget the $40 she loaned my mother in 1998. They came in shifts, like a hospital rotation designed to wear down a stubborn patient. Each one recited the same scripture. Sabrina deserves her day. You can afford it. Don't make your mother beg. Nobody asked why the responsibility was mine. That was not a question that existed in our family, any more than you question which way the river runs. It just runs. I held on, but I could feel my grip slipping, one guilt-soaked phone call at a time. That is how it works when you are the fixer. They do not have to convince you that you owe it. They only have to remind you, over and over, until the reminding feels like the truth. Between calls, I opened my banking app to look at the down payment, the way you touch a bruise to make sure it still hurts, to make sure it is still real. Closing was 18 days away. The number was still there, all 15,000 of it, sitting quiet and safe. I remember feeling a small, dumb flush of pride. See? I told myself. You held the line. You kept the house. There was a text from my bank at the top of my notifications that I did not open because I was late for a shift and because I still believed the worst was behind me. I opened that text after a 14-hour shift, standing in the hospital parking garage, still in my scrubs. It was an alert from my bank, the automated kind, flagging a large transfer for my review. My thumb moved before my brain did. I opened the app to send the down payment to the title company, a thing I had rehearsed in my head like a wedding toast. My savings balance was $11.40. I stared at it the way you stare at a monitor when the line goes flat, waiting for it to be a mistake, a glitch, anything. Then I saw the transfer. $15,000, 3 days earlier, sent out of my account to a vendor called Whitmore Vineyard Events, deposit for the Myers wedding. My legs found the concrete pillar behind me on their own. I have watched people receive terrible news in that hospital for 12 years, and I finally understood the specific silence they fall into. It is not a scream. It is the sound of a whole future being deleted while you watch. I scrolled to the transfer details with a hand that did not feel like mine. The authorizing name on the recurring profile, the one saved into my own online banking, read Carol Myers. My mother had not asked for the money and lost. She had simply decided the argument was beneath her and taken it. I want to stop here for a second. If you have ever been the one everybody leans on, the fixer, the one who can handle it, then you already know the sound my chest made against that pillar. Stay with me, because what happens next is the part I still cannot believe I survived. If this is hitting a nerve, comment the words "I've been her," so I know you're out there. And subscribe, because this is only the beginning. I did not cry in that parking garage. I laughed. It started as one sharp breath, almost a hiccup, and then it took me over, doubled me at the waist against the pillar until my scar ached, and my eyes ran, and a man loading groceries 3 cars down asked if I was okay. I was not okay. I was, for the first time in my life, awake. Because in that ridiculous, howling laughter, I finally saw the whole shape of the thing. Every check I had written, every no I had swallowed, every Sunday I poured coffee I was never poured. It had never been chaos, never bad luck, never a run of family emergencies that happened to always cost me. It was a machine, a beautiful, quiet, generational machine, and I had been both the fuel and the fool feeding it, tightening my own chains and calling it love. My grandfather's voice came up through the laughter like a hand pulling me out of water. Love that keeps a ledger isn't love, it's rent. And I understood, standing in my dirty scrubs with $11 to my name, that I had been paying rent to live in my own family for 34 years, and I had just been evicted for the crime of finally reading the lease. The laughter drained out of me all at once and left something colder and steadier in its place. Not rage. Rage is loud and stupid and burns out. This was quiet. The same quiet I feel when a delivery goes wrong and there is exactly one right thing to do and no time to be afraid. I wiped my face. I got in my car. And I did not drive home, the way a beaten woman drives home to cry. I put the car in gear, pulled out of that garage, and drove straight to my bank. I called my mother from the bank parking lot before I went in, because I am not a coward, and because I wanted to hear it from her mouth first. She answered on the second ring, cheerful, humming, a woman without a single worry in the world. I asked her if she had taken $15,000 from my account. She did not gasp. She did not deny it. She sighed, the patient sigh of a mother explaining the obvious to a slow child. I did what needed doing, she said. You were being stubborn, and the deposit was due, and you can afford it. So I handled it. Handled it. Like a mess I had made, and not the theft of my entire future. I gave you life, Elaine, she went on, warming to it now. I gave you everything. $15,000 is nothing next to that. You'll come around. You always do. That was the sentence that finished it, though she could not have known. You always do. She was not even angry. That was the horror of it. She genuinely believed she had done nothing but redirect a resource to where it was more needed, the way you move money from one child's plate to another's without asking either. And then she said the thing I will hear for the rest of my life. Sabrina needs it more than you do. Not deserves. Needs. As if my mother had been quietly appraising her daughters for decades, weighing us, and had finally read the verdict aloud. One of you is a person. One of you is a fund. I said nothing for a long moment. She mistook my silence for the old surrender, the familiar sound of me folding, and her voice softened into something almost loving. Good girl, she said. I knew you'd understand. I hung up, walked into the bank, and asked to speak to someone about fraud. The fraud specialist was a tired young man named Devin with a tie that had given up around noon. He pulled up my account, and I watched his face change as he read, the way a nurse's face changes when the numbers stop being routine. He asked the standard questions. Did I authorize the transfer? No. Did I know who did? Yes. Then he asked the one that split my life into a before and an after. Ma'am, he said carefully, do you want to open a fraud investigation? Because if you do, and the amount is what it is, this doesn't stay a bank matter. This becomes a police matter. I felt the whole weight of my family press down on that little laminate desk. A police matter. Those words meant detectives. Charges. My mother's name in a system that does not care about Sunday dinners. I thought of my grandfather's forfeiture clause, though I did not know its details yet. Only that money and law and family were about to collide in a way that could not be uncollided. Devin slid a form toward me and set a pen on top of it, and then, decently, he gave me a way out. You can just dispute it as unauthorized, he offered. Get your money back, no report. Lot of folks do that when it's, family. He said family, like a soft landing, and I understood he was offering me the same deal my whole family was offering me. Keep it quiet. Keep it inside. Take the money and let the machine keep running. I looked at that pen for a long time. I thought about the house on Larch Street, and my grandfather's porch, and the smile my mother made when she thinks she has already won. And I did not pick up the pen. Not yet. I had one more thing to see first. My father was waiting on my apartment steps when I got home, which told me two things. My mother had sent him, and my mother was worried. Ron does not leave his recliner for small weather. He stood up when he saw me, hat literally in his hands, and I felt the old pull to make it easy for him, to fix his discomfort the way I fix everyone's. I made myself not. Ellie, he said, don't do this. Whatever you're thinking of doing, it's your mother. We don't do that to each other in this family. I asked him what this family does do, then, when a mother steals from a daughter. He looked at his shoes. That is where my father keeps all his answers. She shouldn't have, he admitted, so quietly I almost missed it. But she did it for Sabrina. She wasn't being greedy. You know how she is about that girl. And there was the whole tragedy of my father in one breath. He could see it was wrong. He just could not see it was wrong enough to disturb his 40 years of peace. Then he said the thing that changed the shape of everything. It slipped out sideways, the way true things do in careful families. She did it to your grandpa too, near the end, he said. With his pension. Nobody made a fuss then. It all worked out. He heard himself a half-second too late and pressed his lips shut, but it was out, hanging in the air between us like smoke. She did it to your grandpa too. I stood on my own steps and felt the floor of the story drop out from under me, revealing another floor beneath it, older, one I had never known was there. This had happened before, and someone I loved had let it. I drove to Sabrina's apartment that night because I needed to know how deep this went, and whether my sister was a passenger in the machine or a driver. I got my answer in under a minute. She opened the door with a wine glass and a fabric swatch, and no trace of guilt on her face, because guilt requires believing you have done something wrong. I told her the money in her wedding deposit was my down payment, stolen from my account. She did not flinch. She sipped. "You always land on your feet," she said, like it was a compliment. "You make good money. You don't even have kids. What do you need a whole house for?" I asked if she knew our mother had taken it without asking. Of course she knew. She had watched the deposit clear and asked no questions, the way you eat a meal without interrogating the butcher. "It's my wedding," she said. And there was that word again. Wedding. The shield my family had learned to hold up against every objection. "Mom said you'd be fine with it eventually. She said you always come around." There it was a second time. You always come around. My mother had built her entire theft on that prediction, the way an engineer trusts a beam. Elaine holds weight. Elaine always holds. Then Sabrina, brightening, delivered the detail that would matter more than she could imagine. The vineyard deposit was non-refundable, she told me proudly, as if that made it more mine to have given. 15,000, locked in, no takebacks. She smiled the exact private smile my mother makes, and I realized I was watching the machine reproduce itself in real time, mother to daughter, a factory stamping out the next model. I left without finishing the sentence I came to say. There was nothing to say to a person who did not think a crime had occurred. There was only something to do. 2 days later, I sat across a metal desk from a fraud detective named Alan Poole, a broad, unhurried man who spoke like he had all the time in the world and had heard every version of every family. He had my bank records spread out in front of him, printed, highlighted, the paper trail my mother had left because it never occurred to her that the fund would ever audit itself. He walked me through it gently. The saved profile, the transfer, the access. "It's clean," he said, which in his world meant damning. Then he took out a single sheet and turned it to face me, and set his own pen on top of it, and I felt the whole world narrow to the size of one blank line. "Name the person who used your card," he said. My hand did not move. I want you to understand what was living in that pen. 34 years of keeping it in the family. Every fight buried at the sink so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Every bruise you don't photograph. My whole life had been a training program in one skill, protecting this family from the truth about itself, and now a stranger was asking me to write the truth down in ink, where it could never be unwritten. I thought about my grandfather, who had faced this same choice with this same woman and chosen silence, and how the silence had simply passed the bill down to me. I picked up the pen. I did not shake. I wrote, in letters that came out steadier than my heartbeat, "Carol Myers, my mother." Then I set the pen down and slid the paper back across the desk, and it was the lightest I had felt in years, and the heaviest. Detective Poole read the name, nodded once, and reached for a folder. The ink was not even dry when my phone lit up on the desk between us. It was Sabrina. I stepped into the hallway to take it, because you do not scream at your sister in front of a detective, and Sabrina was already screaming when I said hello. "What did you do?" she kept saying, over and over, her voice climbing into a register I had not heard since we were kids, and I broke her music box. It took me a full minute to understand her through the crying. When I had opened the fraud dispute 2 days earlier, the bank had done exactly what banks do. It had frozen the disputed funds and flagged the transaction, and it had notified the receiving vendor that the $15,000 deposit was under investigation as fraudulent. Whitmore Vineyard, a business that did not want to be a co-defendant in a theft case, had immediately released the date and demanded a clean payment or a cancellation. The non-refundable deposit Sabrina had bragged about was now non-existent. The string quartet wanted a card that worked. The whole beautiful machine of her perfect day was seizing up in real time, and she had finally noticed, because for the first time in her life, the money had stopped flowing toward her, and she did not understand why the tap had gone dry. "You have to fix this," she wailed, and I almost laughed again because there it was, the reflex, the family religion, hardwired even in panic. Elaine will fix it. Elaine always fixes it. Then her fear curdled into the only weapon she had ever needed. If you don't drop this, she hissed, I'll tell Grant where the money came from. She meant it as a threat against me. She did not understand yet that she had just described the exact thing that would end her wedding no matter what I did. I told her, very calmly, that I was not going to fix it. And then I hung up, and I went back in to finish giving my statement. The family council convened at my mother's house that weekend, and I was summoned to it like a defendant, not invited to it like a daughter. I went, because I wanted them to say it to my face. They were all there. My mother, dry-eyed and regal at the head of the table where my father usually pretended to sit. Aunt Karen, 2 cousins, my father in the corner, studying the carpet. Sabrina, puffy and furious. The room turned to me the moment I walked in, and I understood I was not there to be heard. I was there to be sentenced. Aunt Karen appointed herself judge. She stood, actually stood, and delivered the creed I had heard my whole life, but never quite so nakedly. Family, she announced, does not send family to jail. She let it hang there like scripture. Everyone nodded. Everyone. It did not seem to occur to a single person in that room to finish the sentence honestly, which would have been, family does not send family to jail, but family is apparently allowed to rob family blind. The theft was not the crime, in their eyes. My response to it was. I looked around that table at the people I had bailed out, driven to appointments, covered for, loved, and I saw not one ally. My mother had done the math perfectly. She had bet that the whole family would circle around the thief and cast out the robbed, because that is what the machine is built to do, and she had bet right. I felt the last of my safety net dissolve. As I left, one person followed me out. My great-aunt Frances, 81, who had said nothing the entire meeting. She caught my sleeve on the porch, pressed a folded scrap of paper into my palm, and whispered to me before going back inside. Talk to Walter's lawyer, Ellie. Walter's lawyer was a woman named Priscilla Aldous, who had a corner office over the hardware store and a photograph of my grandfather on her filing cabinet. She remembered me. Ellie, she said, he talked about you. Sit down. I told her what my mother had done, and I watched her expression settle into something that was not surprise. She had been waiting for this call, I realized, maybe for years. She opened a drawer and took out my grandfather's trust, the real one, not the simple will everyone had assumed. Walter had left the family lake house and a modest fund in trust, to be divided among his heirs, my mother and her sister and the grandchildren. But there was a clause. Priscilla read it to me in her flat lawyer's voice, and the room tilted. Any beneficiary convicted of a felony involving theft, fraud, or dishonesty would forfeit their entire share, which would then be redistributed among the others. I sat back. If my mother was convicted of stealing from me, she would lose everything her own father had left her. I had walked in to report a theft. I was walking out holding the power to disinherit my mother from the grave of the one man who had ever protected me. It was too much power to want. I asked Priscilla, my voice smaller than I liked, why my grandfather would ever write such a thing about his own daughter. She looked at his photograph, and then at me, and she said the sentence that turned the whole story inside out. He wrote that clause, she said, the same year your mother did to him exactly what she just did to you. I had thought I was the first. I was only the latest. And my grandfather, dying, had reached forward through time to hand me the shield he had never used on himself. Priscilla laid it out for me the way you lay out an X-ray, because I asked her to, because I needed to understand the machine that had made my mother before I decided what to do to her. Years ago, when Walter was slipping, and his hands shook too hard to sign his own checks, Carol had stepped in to help. And Carol had helped herself. She had moved his pension money the way she moved everything, quietly, certain she deserved it, certain she had earned it by being the one who stayed, the one who bathed him and drove him and sat through the long nights. And here is the part that lodged in my chest like a splinter I could not reach. She had. My mother had been Walter's fixer once. His Elaine. The responsible daughter who carried the weight while Karen fluttered in for holidays, the one who gave up her own young life to nurse an old man, and who was never once thanked for it, because you do not thank the fund. So when the thanks never came, she took the payment herself and told herself it was owed. Walter had not pressed charges. He had loved her too much and been too ashamed. But he had gone quietly to Priscilla and built a clause, a fence around the next generation, and then he had watched his granddaughter clear his plates and known somehow where the weight would land next. The machine was older than me. It was older than my mother. She was not its inventor. She was its victim and its heir, running the exact program that had been run on her, passing the rent downstairs to the only person she trusted to keep paying it. For one long moment, I pitied her more than I have ever pitied anyone. And then I remembered $11.40, and I stopped. Understanding where a machine comes from does not obligate you to keep feeding it. I understood that the way you understand a thing in your body before your mouth catches up. 2 days later, I drove to the police station and signed the criminal complaint, the sworn one, the one where you raise the truth up out of the private dark and hand it to the state. Detective Poole slid it across the desk and, decent man that he was, gave me one last exit. Once this goes into the system, he said, I can't pull it back out. The DA takes it from here, not you, not me. You sure? I thought about every version of me that had said yes for 34 years so that other people could be comfortable. I signed my name, Elaine Myers, in ink, under oath, and the old life ended right there, cleanly, the way a heart monitor ends, one flat, clean line where a rhythm used to be. I walked out into the afternoon, and my phone showed 19 missed calls, a wall of them, my mother and Sabrina and Karen and numbers I did not know, the whole machine roaring as it felt the first bolt come loose. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove to Larch Street and parked across from the house with the blue shutters, and I sat there until my hands stopped shaking. I know some of you are yelling at your screen right now. Call it off. She's your mother. I felt that too. Believe me, I felt it in the marrow of me. Hold on to that feeling, because in a few minutes you are going to understand exactly why I couldn't. If this is landing somewhere tender in you, subscribe, because you are going to want to see how this ends. It is not where you think. The consequences arrived faster than I was ready for, the way they always do once the paperwork is real. Within a week, my mother was formally charged. Grand theft and identity fraud. Felonies both. The numbers too large and the evidence too clean for anything softer. In a city, that is a headline nobody reads. In a small town, it is the only thing anybody talks about at the grocery store, at church, in the school pickup line. And the town did not tell the story the way it had happened. It told the story the way the machine wanted it told. Carol Myers, that lovely woman, dragged into court by her own ungrateful daughter over a wedding, can you imagine? Over money. My mother wept beautifully to anyone who would listen, and everyone listened because a crying mother is a better story than a robbed daughter every single time. At the hospital, a coworker I had covered shifts for asked me, not unkindly, whether I really thought jail was worth it over family. I did not have a speech ready. I just said that she took my house and watched the woman's face rearrange because she had not heard that part. Nobody had heard that part. The machine had edited it out. I learned something that week that I wish I hadn't. When you finally stop absorbing a family's damage, the damage does not disappear. It just goes looking for a new place to land, and for a while, that place is your name. I let it land. I went to work. I delivered 3 babies on a Thursday, held 3 exhausted new mothers' hands, and told each of them they had done something impossibly hard and meant it, and did not once mention that I understood exactly how it felt to be broken open and keep going anyway. Grant Delaney was not a bad man, which was inconvenient for everyone. Sabrina's fiancé was a high school science teacher with kind eyes and a mortgage of his own, the sort of steady, decent person my sister had somehow landed and did not appreciate. He called me directly, which took nerve, and asked me one plain question. The money for the venue, he said. Sabrina told me your mom gifted it. Is that true? I did not lie for my family anymore. I told him the truth, all of it, in the flat, calm voice I use to deliver news that will hurt. There was a long silence on the line, the silence of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about the woman he was going to marry. He thanked me. He actually thanked me, quietly, and hung up. I found out later what he had done with the truth. He had gone home and asked Sabrina about it, and Sabrina had done what Sabrina does, which was to explain why it was fine, why it was owed, why I was the villain for making a fuss. And Grant had sat in his kitchen and watched his future wife defend a theft with her mother's exact words, in her mother's exact tone, and had seen, the way I had seen in that parking garage, the whole shape of the machine he was about to marry into. He saw who would be poured for, and who would pour. 3 days later, Grant was gone from every group chat, every plan, every shared account. He did not make a scene. He just quietly declined to spend his life feeding something that would have eaten him too. And Sabrina, who had never in her life been the one left behind, discovered what that felt like the week her wedding died. Here is where they nearly got me. The assistant district attorney, a sharp and honest woman named Nia Alvarez, called me in to prepare, and in the course of it she told me the truth about my own power because she was required to. As the victim, my cooperation was the spine of the case. If I softened, if I declined to testify, if I signed a statement asking the state to show leniency or to drop the matter as a family dispute, the whole thing could quietly deflate. It would be harder to prove without me. It might not be worth proving at all. She was not pushing me either way. She was just handing me the last exit. The way Devin had. The way Detective Poole had. The way life keeps handing you the door right up until the moment it locks. And of course, the family found out about the exit within a day because the machine has excellent hearing. The offer came dressed as reconciliation. My mother would pay it all back. Every dollar. From her share of Walter's estate. If only I would sign the paper asking the state to let it go. The wedding could even be salvaged, Karen suggested, if I would just stop punishing everyone. And I would be welcomed home. That was the real bribe, buried under the money. I could have my family back. All I had to do was recant, take the check, and slide back into my old chair at the sink, and everything would go on exactly as it always had. Aunt Karen said the creed again, softer this time, almost tender. The way you gentle a spooked horse. Family, Elaine, doesn't send family to jail. And then they gave me a pen and a paper, and they left me alone with it in Priscilla's borrowed conference room. It was the same kind of pen. I noticed that. I noticed it the way you notice a knife. I almost signed it. I need you to know that. Because if I pretend I was strong the whole time, then this story is a lie, and no use to you. I sat alone in that conference room with the pen in my hand and the paper in front of me, and every cell in my body that had been trained for 34 years screamed at me to make it stop. Sign it. Take the money. Get your mother back. Your father, your sister, the Sunday table, the only people who share your childhood, the only ones who remember you small. The good daughter in me, the fixer, the one who had kept this family standing on her own 2 shoulders. She wanted to sign so badly I could taste it. And the money was real. I would get my down payment back and keep the family both. On paper, it was everything I wanted. Then, in the quiet of that borrowed room, my grandfather sat back down beside me the way he used to on the porch. Love that keeps a ledger isn't love, Ellie, it's rent. And I finally understood the whole sentence, the part I had been too young to hear the first time. If I signed that paper, I would not be buying my family back. I would be paying rent again. One more installment, the biggest one yet, to go on living in a house where my worth was measured by what I would surrender. The welcome home was not a gift. It was a lease renewal. And it would come due again. And again. For the rest of my life. And someday it would come due for someone smaller than me. I picked the pen back up. And I thought about Sabrina. Not the Sabrina of today, screaming into the phone, but the Sabrina of 10 years from now. Standing at her own sink, holding an invoice, telling herself it was owed. Sabrina came to me before the hearing, not to apologize, because she did not have the vocabulary for it, but because she had nowhere else to put her collapse. Grant was gone. The wedding was gone. The vineyard had rebooked her date to a couple from 2 towns over. She stood in my doorway, smaller than I had ever seen her, and for once she was not performing. "You ruined my life," she said, but the fury had no floor under it anymore, And halfway through the sentence, it just fell apart into crying. I did not fix it. That was the hardest not doing of my life, standing there while my little sister wept and keeping my hands at my sides. But then she said something that made the whole brutal year worth it. Something I do not think she even meant to say. "Mom said you'd always pay," Sabrina whispered, wiping her face. "She always said it. Elaine will always pay." And Sabrina looked up at me with the dawning horror of a person who has just heard her own future in someone else's past, who has just realized that a mother who assigns one daughter as the fund has, by definition, assigned the other as the spender, and that neither role is love, and that she had been just as used as I had, only in a costume that felt like being adored. It was the first true thing my sister had ever said to me. I did not hug her. We were not there yet, and maybe we never would be. But I told her the one thing our grandfather would have wanted her to hear. "You don't have to pay it either," I said. "Neither of us was ever the debt." She did not answer, but she did not argue. And in my family, that was practically a revolution. The preliminary hearing was held in a small wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of floor wax and old radiators, and my whole family came, arranged behind the defense like a wall. My mother sat at the defense table in a soft gray cardigan she had chosen to look harmless, her hands folded, her face composed into the exact portrait of a wronged and gentle woman. My father sat behind her, studying his knees. Aunt Karen glared at me across the aisle like I was the thief, and on the table in front of me, metaphorically and then literally, lay the two papers that were the whole story. One was the declination, the statement asking the state to stand down, the pen laid across it, the exit still open even now, even here, right up to the last breath. The other was the truth, the sworn complaint, already signed, waiting only for me to affirm it out loud in a room full of the people it would destroy. Nia Alvarez leaned over and murmured that I did not have to do anything I could not live with, that there was no shame in choosing peace. My mother turned in her chair and found my eyes across that terrible room, and she did not look angry. She looked certain, the way she had looked at the sink, the way she had looked the day she smiled her private smile and said, "We'll figure it out." She was certain I would fold. She had been certain my whole life, and she had been right my whole life, because I had never once made her wrong. The judge shuffled his papers and looked up over his glasses, and the radiator ticked in the silence, and he asked the question that the last 34 years had been quietly building toward. "The complaining witness may address the court," he said. "Ms. Myers, do you wish to proceed?" I stood up. My legs held, which surprised me, and the whole room turned, and I felt every pair of family eyes land on me like weight. This was not the moment a secret came out. Everyone in that courtroom already knew what my mother had done. This was the other thing, the harder thing, the thing no reveal could ever do for me. This was me, choosing, out loud, in front of everyone who had ever taught me to stay quiet. My mother rose halfway from her chair, and her composure finally cracked, and out came the last card she had, the one that had never once failed her. "Elaine," she said, and her voice broke on my name. "Please. Family doesn't send family to jail." The room held its breath, and I looked at my mother, at the woman who had carried me and fed me and spent me, who was herself once spent by the man in the photograph on Priscilla's cabinet, and I felt no rage and no triumph, only a terrible, quiet clarity, like the moment in a delivery when everything narrows to the one thing that must be done. "You're right, Mom," I said, and my voice did not shake. "Family doesn't. But this stopped being family the day you decided love was something I owed you." I turned to the judge. "Your Honor," I said, "I wish to proceed." And with that, the whole machine went off its rails at once. My mother made a sound I had never heard her make. Karen stood up. Somewhere behind me, Sabrina was crying, but differently now, quietly. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had already won the only thing I came for, and I had already lost everything it cost, both in the same breath, the way you can hold a newborn and grieve your own mother in the same aching moment. I got my boundary. I got my house. And I lost my family, my mother, and the good daughter I had spent 34 years being, all of it gone the instant those words left my mouth. It was not a victory that felt like winning. It felt like finally setting down something I had been carrying so long I had mistaken it for my own body. The case did not go to a long trial, because the evidence was exactly as clean as Detective Poole had said, and my mother's lawyer was a realist. To avoid the harsher sentence a jury might hand down, Carol took a plea. She stood before the judge in her soft gray cardigan and admitted, on the record, in words that would exist in a public file forever, that she had taken $15,000 from her daughter's account without permission, using her daughter's own banking credentials. She said it flatly, the way you confess to a thing you still do not believe was wrong. Sabrina, for knowing and staying silent as the funds were spent, accepted a small conditional plea of her own, the kind that comes with community service and a stain rather than a cell. And then the second machine, the slower one my grandfather had built, turned over and did its quiet work. A felony conviction for theft and fraud. Priscilla did not even have to argue it. The forfeiture clause triggered on its own, the way a trap does not celebrate, and my mother's share of Walter's estate, the lake house and the fund, dissolved out of her hands and redistributed to the rest of us. Nobody won it like a prize. It simply left her, the way the trust her own father could not bring himself to enforce in life, finally enforced itself in death. My mother looked at me across the courtroom one last time, and there was no softness left in her at all. "You'll regret this," she said, low, meant only for me. And I met her eyes, and I answered her honestly, because I was done managing her feelings for her. "Maybe I will," I said, "but I'll regret it as a free woman." The room emptied the way rooms do after something irreversible, in a shuffle of coats and lowered voices, everyone suddenly needing to be somewhere else. Aunt Karen would not look at me, which was its own kind of relief. My father cried. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen him do it, my quiet father with his answers kept in his shoes, and for one foolish second my old heart leapt, thinking the tears might finally be for me, for the daughter he had watched carry everything. They were not. He went to my mother. He put his arm around her and walked her out into the gray afternoon, comforting the woman who had stolen from his child, because that was the seat he had chosen 40 years ago, and he was not going to stand up from it now. I understood, watching them go, that some people would rather be comfortable inside a broken thing than brave in the cold outside it, and that you cannot save them, and that trying to is just one more installment of rent. I did not follow. I gathered my own coat, and when I stepped out into the courthouse hallway, alone, expecting to be alone, I found I was not. Sabrina was there, leaning against the wall by the water fountain, waiting for me. She was not screaming. She was not performing. She was just there, red-eyed and quiet, like a person who has finally run all the way out of somebody else's script. The court ordered restitution, the full $15,000, to be repaid to me on a schedule the law would enforce even if my mother's conscience never would. It was enough. Combined with a 2-week extension from a title company that had seen stranger delays, it was exactly enough to save the house on Larch Street. I closed on a Friday. I stood in the empty front room with the blue shutters throwing afternoon light across the bare floor, the keys warm in my hand, and I waited to feel triumphant. I did not. I felt the particular quiet of a thing you fought for and won, and now have to live inside alone. There was the kitchen, just big enough for a real table. There was no one, yet, to sit at it. I had traded a full table where I was a fund for an empty table where I was a person, and I would be lying if I told you the trade felt free of grief. It did not. Victory and loss had arrived in the same box, the way they always do when the person you defeat is someone you also love. But it was mine. Every board of it was mine, bought with 6 years of packed lunches and one impossible word said out loud in a wood-paneled room. And for the first time in my life, the only ledger in my kitchen was going to be a grocery list. The weeks after were quieter than I expected, and the quiet was not empty. It was the sound of a machine that has finally stopped running. My mother does not speak to me, and I have made peace with the silence, because her silence costs me nothing, and her voice always did. But something strange happened in the margins. One by one, in ones and twos, other people from my family began to reach out. Privately, carefully, in text messages and grocery aisle whispers. A cousin who had always been the responsible one on her side of the family. An uncle who paid for everyone's Christmas and was never thanked. Great Aunt Frances, who had pressed the lawyer's name into my hand and now pressed my hand again and said, simply, "You did what he couldn't." They had all seen themselves in it. The machine had been running quietly in more houses than mine, and watching one person unplug it had given a few of them permission to wonder if they could too. I kept going to work. I kept catching babies in the middle of the night and handing them, slippery and furious and brand new, to mothers who did not yet know what they would carry for these children, or what they would refuse to. I hoped, handing them over, that they would learn the difference sooner than I had. Sabrina came to the house on Larch Street once, that first autumn, with no wedding and no grant, and no idea who she was without the role she had been handed at birth. She stood in my new kitchen and looked around at the small, honest life I had bought, and she did not sneer at it the way the old Sabrina would have. She asked me, quietly, not as an accusation but as a real question, the first real question of her adult life. "She did it to you your whole life, didn't she? The pouring, the keeping score." And I told her yes. We did not fall into each other's arms. We are not that kind of sisters, and one true conversation does not undo 3 decades of assigned seats. But we sat at my kitchen table, the two of us, the fund and the spender both finally off the clock, and we drank coffee I poured for us at the exact same time, into 2 matching cups. It was not forgiveness. It was smaller than that, and truer. It was the first thing we had ever shared that nobody was keeping track of. My grandfather was right about the only thing that ever mattered. Love that keeps a ledger isn't love, it's rent. And the day I finally refused to pay it, I discovered I had never once been the one who owed. That's my story. 6 years of savings, 1 card I never should have trusted, and 1 small word? No, that cost me a family and gave me back myself. If someone in your life has ever made you feel that love was a bill you would never finish paying, let this be your sign. You are allowed to stop. You were never the debt. Share this with the woman who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.